Here's a peek at what guests had to say after the show.
All right, we're back on the internets. Now, Michael Moore, how about making a documentary on how Citizens United is legalized bribery? How about it? Lazy? Get working on that, Michael Moore.
Yeah, I make documentaries about the things that we're not talking about right now that we should be talking about.
Like what? What are you working on?
Well, I'm working on a film that's going to...
Majid, has the terrorist ideology of groups like Al-Qaeda become so mainstream that they no longer have to seek refuge in places like Afghanistan?
Well, I think so. Sadly, what's happened since the death of bin Laden is I believe President Obama had his own mission accomplished moment when he declared effectively that Al-Qaeda had been defeated. What in fact has happened is that they've become stronger than they ever were under bin Laden. Whereas under bin Laden they were asylum seekers in Afghanistan, what they are now is the ones giving others asylum. In countries like Syria, in the opposition, they've come to hijack that revolution. They're controlling cities. They had controlled an area larger than the size of France in Mali until the French expelled them. It's an insurgency. It's not just an organization. And the phrase I often hear that I despise, this phrase, Al-Qaeda inspired terrorism. No, Al-Qaeda didn't inspire terrorism. It's the end product of decades of this ideology festering on the grassroots in the Middle East. The end product is Al-Qaeda, but terrorist organizations existed before Al-Qaeda. We had Hezbollah, we had Hamas. In Pakistan, there's many, many organizations killing people on the streets, including the Taliban.
And how much support do they get from local population?
They ask the similar sorts of questions that I heard you asking here on this panel. They sit in Iraq and they ask, why did 500,000 children die before the Iraq War? And when Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was asked by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, she said, you know, is the price for American foreign policy worth the death of 500,000 children? And Albright said, you know, and I'm quoting her, she said, you know, that's a tough question, but I think the price is worth it. And it's when they hear those sorts of responses that they ask the similar questions on the other side. So there's an ignorance on both sides that needs to be addressed, and part of my work is attempting to address that on both sides.
Okay, well...
Keep working on it.
Richard Dawkins, will this country elect an atheist as president in the next couple of decades?
I was kind of joking when I said that Obama was definitely an atheist and Kennedy was too. I think they might be. If you think about it, 534 members of the US Congress cannot all be religious. I mean, that's a statistical nonsense. Many of them are quite well educated. This is...
Them fighting words here on the panel.
Never mind the last bit. I mean, statistically, it's an obvious nonsense that 534 members of Congress are all religious. They've got to be lying, and if they're lying, maybe quite a few presidential candidates are lying.
In politics,
as well.
you have to.
You have to lie, and that's
have
the point.
to lie.
I think this will happen in our lifetime. I think an atheist...
Really?
Well, yes. Again, because 16-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, they don't give a shit.
Right.
About whether you believe in God or not.
But I don't know about our lifetimes, unless we're going to live very long. Because, I mean, look at pot. We thought, I remember when we were in college, I'm talking about the 70s, we thought, you know what, when we get to be the people who are running things, we'll legalize pot. Well, we've been running things for quite a while. And it still isn't legal. It's just now past the 50% mark in the polls. How long is it going to be before the polls get translated into legislation? I mean,
within this decade.
I think it's going to move.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's going to move like marriage equality, where all of a sudden there is a movement behind, and it goes so rapidly.
Well, who would have ever imagined growing up that you'd have the most famous and prolific rapper would be white and the president would be black?
One rather depressing thing about youth. In Britain, polls show that a very high percentage of British Muslims think that the penalty for apostasy should be death, and it's a much higher percentage for young people than for old people. Older Muslims in Britain don't think that. Young people...
And that has very little to do with American foreign policy.
Of course.
Can I just say, of course it does.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the of course it
obviously,
does.
no one's defending, I don't think, here, American foreign policy. I certainly would.
of course
That's
not.
the effect of radicalization and the ideology at play, but also it does demonstrate the other thing, that older generation who don't subscribe to those values were also Muslims.
Yes.
And they knew their religion as well. In fact, when I joined the Islamist group that I joined, my parents and still do, remain opposed. And in fact, my mother slapped me around the face when I was 16 and said, don't you dare go down that path, which made me go down it even more. But, you know, the point is that they are still Muslims, and my parents said to me, that's not the Islam that we were raised on, that we recognize. But radicalization has certainly taken root with the second generation because the ideology is new. That's the difference. This ideology that I refer to as Islamism has strangleholded these youth, and it's not just about foreign policy, it's a factor, but of course there's the ideological narrative, which is also another factor.
Can I ask you a question? I don't know the answer to this. I've wondered this since 9/11. I've wondered this. The week before the hijackers committed this atrocity, they were going to the strip club.
Yeah. So
and I'm thinking, well, how? Geez, they were like, didn't they?
That's an excellent question, because that these guys, no single terrorist organization has at its head anyone that studied the religion. None of them are theologians. As we were saying earlier, they're doctors, engineers. Whether it's Bin Laden, whether it's the guy that recruited me to my group, he's a doctor. If you look at all of them, they have a preponderance of doctors, and nothing against doctors and engineers and scientists, but they have a preponderance of scientists
hijackers
among extremists.
The 19 hijackers were mostly college educated.
Right.
And how do you explain that?
From the middle class.
It's again, as I said, nothing against science. Nothing against science.
Yes,
It's the black and white thinking.
Religion is how you explain it.
No, allow me to
these
answer.
are highly
It's the black and white empirical method.
It's not.
It's the empirical
It's the
method that's
poison.
applied.
You're highly educated,
There's
and
lots
if
of
you've got this religion, it's the poison.
Yeah.
Religion.
Bill is right. It's the religion.
Walls off a part of your mind. I mean, this is the question I've been asking for 30 years. It's the question I asked for in religious. I didn't ask how could I be spiritual? I asked the question, how could otherwise intelligent people wall off a part of their mind and believe in a talking snake? That's what I want to believe. What I want to know.
Religion and dogma generally presents a level of challenges. It presents certain issues, but what I'm talking about, terrorism, is essentially a modern phenomenon. The phenomenon of suicide bombings and launching oneself into crowded places to kill everyone within Muslim majority countries has emerged in relatively modern times.
Right.
So something extra had to have happened to this 1400-year-old religion, and that's what I call the ideological narrative. Where did that narrative come from? Well, it was actually what happened is that it was used as a form of resistance in the colonial times, because these, in the Arab world, they adopted post-World War I European fascism, ideas of a super state, a super people. They adopted these ideas. They first became Arab socialism, known as Baathism, which led to the Saddam Husseins and the Gaddafis. And then on top of that, they built it onto the religion, and it became Islamism. And so it's this peculiar combination of modern fascism superimposed onto religious doctrines, which is different to the Islam of my parents and my grandparents.
About the strip clubs, the Tsarnaevs, the kids who did the thing in the Boston bombing.
Yeah.
Nobody saw that coming. If you had a relationship with those two, could you have seen it coming? Because Westerners couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, this is the work we do. So when I was in prison in Egypt as a political prisoner there, interesting, in the same prison that eventually held Hosni Mubarak, it's called Mazar al-Torah prison, one of the things I did is have a conversation with a convicted professional bomb maker. And he came to Egypt to train Egyptians to cross the border into the Gaza Strip, to train Palestinians to kill Israelis. I said to him the following, I said, look, the majority of these people protesting, first of all, the largest protest against the Iraq war wasn't in Pakistan, it wasn't in Saudi Arabia, it wasn't in Turkey, it was in Britain, this country you want to blow up. Second fact, most of the protesters were non-Muslims. So what does that tell you about the people you define as your enemy? In fact, Turkey is a member of NATO that's part of this alliance, so surely you should be trying to blow up Turkish Muslims instead of the Brits who were opposed to the Iraq war. Now, first of all, I kind of got a look from him that kind of told me he wanted to kill me. But that conversation lasted over a couple of weeks, and one day I was in my cell, and he came knocking on the door. And he said, Majid, I've been thinking. Now, this is a guy who knows how to make bombs and kill people. He says, I've been thinking, these people aren't my enemy. He said he was still a terrorist, he was still an Islamist, he was still an extremist, but he no longer believed in targeting Britain. I mean, it's a step forward.
Jihad-ish.
Ish, yeah, I suppose so, yeah. So,
Jihad. Boy, we need about 1,000 of you out there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience. Thank you, panel.
thank you.
Real Time with Bill Maher, Friday night at 10. Ask Bill and his guests your questions right after the show at HBO.com.